In 2005, Eternia dropped her debut album. It's called Life. It consisted of bars, confidence, wordplay, and everything that makes an album great. She's about to drop a new album called Free with Rel McCoy and continues to display what makes her great and what makes hip hop great. Eternia, welcome to allhiphop.com, presents the library with Tim Einenkel. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. That was a great introduction.
Thank you. So, obviously you debuted in 2005, but I know you were doing stuff way before that. Can you and contributing to hip hop and hip hop culture? Can you take us back to when kind of rap music and hip hop culture first got on your radar, and the first time you kind of first time it really spoke to you and said, "Hey, this is what I want to do."
Well, it was definitely late 80s. Yeah, late 80s, probably just before 1990. My brother's 2 years older than me, and everything he did was the coolest thing ever. It's like we basically mimicked my brother. And we were living in Ottawa at the time, Ottawa, Canada, and he brought home hip hop in the form of what I remember that he brought home was Public Enemy, Two Live Crew. I want to say some LL Cool J later on. There was some Black Sheep. He listened to a little bit of Run DMC. He listened to like what I always say was the most popular stuff on the radio at the time. So the pop versions of hip hop, which was great that hip hop was on commercial radio at that time. But it's just what we could get our hands on. We were kids. This is way before I came, coming of age, and way before I kind of made my own decisions when it came to music. So at that point, without knowing the ramifications of it, I just was a kid who was like absorbing information and mimicking what I heard. So I started rapping, and I was always a writer, and I always wrote poetry, and that immediately just translated into writing rhymes. And even in grade 5 on the playground, kids knew me as that one. Like they'd be like, "Yo, spit for me." Like I was spitting for kids on the playground in grade 5. Probably really corny raps, probably not my own, but I was. And then I probably started writing my own songs at around the age of 13. And then at 15, I moved out of the house and I got kicked out. And when I moved out of the house, that's when hip hop became, it was always a passion for me and I was always known for it in my social circles. But that's when hip hop kind of became a lifestyle and a culture and a way of life for me from that point on. I always say that hip hop kind of saved me because it kept me focused on doing something productive when I could have been doing a lot of other things as a teenager, running around in the streets and moving around a lot and homeless a bit and out of school for a while. And it kept me focused. So I would just roll with these rap crews and usually like end up sleeping on their couch and crashing and all that. And in a large way, the skills that I had opened doors for me and protected me as well.
I want to ask you about getting, leaving the house at 15. But prior to that, the artists you mentioned that your brother brought home were American artists, right? But if
Well,
of
there was
course,
some Canadian artists too, actually. I'm sorry I didn't mention that. Kish. I remember rolling up to like, it must have been grade 5. We went to this school, this small school, and we'd like turn it up loud. We were in like a minivan. We'd turn up Kish up loud or Maestro Fresh Wes. Just so like when we opened the door, it would be blaring when we walked out. We were doing this on purpose in grade 5. It was funny. But definitely some Canadian acts as well. Specifically, the names that come to mind the most are Dream Warriors, Kish, and Maestro Fresh
right.
Wes at the time.
And I want to ask you about that. I mean, Maestro, Michie Mee, these are two of, you could say, arguably Canadians, like pioneers, right? What were, but one, what was their impact on you? Uh, have you ever, met them? What is, what was that first impression like? And then also, I want to ask you about Shad as well, who's another incredible
Yeah,
Canadian MC.
Shad, yeah.
What kind of overall, what has their influence been on you as an artist and also as a person?
Wow. Well, Maestro probably had the greatest impact out of everyone I've met in the scene, although I'm cool with a lot of the legends now, which is crazy in full circle. Um, the first time I met Maestro Fresh West, it's funny, I don't remember the exact instance, but I know I was making music and he basically was like, "Yo, you're dope. I heard you spit." Like, I think I had a single on the radio at the time in Toronto, early 2000s maybe. And, uh, and yeah, it was just crazy because he was like, "Yo, you can spit, you're dope." And if you've ever met Maestro, he's super hyped. Like he's amped all the time. Like you wonder like where he gets his energy from. And he's just like, "Yo, you're crazy." Like, you know what I'm saying? And I was just in awe because in Canada, he's a legend. He's huge. So, and then another beautiful moment was the first music video I ever shot was for Sorrow Song. I think it was around 2002. And he ended up being in the video. I wore his gear, Dope State Classics, which is in his original. If you watch his videos from the 80s, you'll see him rocking Dope State jackets. And we had some special shirts made just for the video. and he kind of plays this role of like a mentor passing the torch backstage, where he like gives me a hug and a dap and like says some words of wisdom in my ear and then sends me off on stage at the beginning of the video. And so that was a really symbolic moment for me to have my first video single, have Maestro just kind of passing the torch on. And he's the kind of person that will hit you up on Christmas or on special occasions, or just like drop a little gem of wisdom in your ear when you run into him. So I think that has been a friendship that's been such a huge gift to me. And Michie as well, like she's just always inclusive of the woman coming up in the scene, inviting us on her stages. She does a special, I think it's like a Gemini bash, where she celebrates her birthday every year, and she'll invite us to come up on stage. And recently she gave like these certificates of recognition to women in hip hop in Toronto, and invited us all there and know this, and gave us these certificates. And so these are people that have paved the way for us, that are honoring those that come after them, and basically being like exactly what they should be, you know, the mentor that helps us, that helps open doors and that helps us understand things, you know. So Kish too, cool as hell. When I met him at Manifesto in like 2010, I think, I was blown away by meeting Kish. We rocked, the first Manifesto we ever did in Toronto was 2006 or 2007, and we rocked in front of Nathan Phillips Square, City Hall, and Dream Warriors rocked on stage with us, and I was just like, this is insane, like what am I doing here, rocking on stage with these cats. So all that to say, everybody I've met in the Canadian hip hop scene that are legends are humble, and have been really gracious, and have been really awesome to connect with, and I consider them, a lot of them, friends and kind of peers, although really obviously I look up to them. But yeah. And Shad, I mean, I could speak a long time about Shad. I really think that he walks with such integrity when it comes to his career and his music and his decisions, and he does not go with the flow of what the industry or what the world says you should be doing, and that's worked really well for him, and I look to him for inspiration in that regard.
I have to imagine that American music, television, kind of played a role as well in, I guess, maybe influencing Canadian hip hop. One, what influence did it have on Canadian hip hop? But two, very, I don't know, silly fundamental question is, if someone said to you, what's the main difference between American hip hop, and obviously there's different regions to that, and then Canadian hip hop, and obviously there's different regions to that, what would your answer be to that?
That is a tough question, Tim. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question, because we were so highly influenced by American hip hop in Canada, even previous to, like, there was, when I came up, we didn't have American MTV on our stations in Canada. We didn't have BET on our stations in Canada. And we had like one American radio station from Buffalo, WBLK, that we did listen to in Toronto, which definitely influenced us greatly. But other than that, it was mostly like magazines. I actually found that a lot of how I was influenced by American hip hop was through buying magazines, reading about artists before I heard about them, not really hearing about them because there wasn't a lot of outlets that was playing hip hop in Canada. There was a few college radio stations, a couple hours on our Much Music, but and then just reading about them and then going and buying their album after I read about them, because I was like, ooh, like now I know about these people and I'm gonna go buy their records through like Columbia House. Remember those like things where you used to like these for free? Yeah. I would pick up a whole bunch of stuff that way as a kid, as a teenager. So to answer your question, well, once MTV and BET came to Canada, I think that was around 1997, give or take, things changed drastically. I think that kids started sounding a lot more like American artists. I always joke that like every city in Canada would have their version of a Mobb Deep or their version of a Slum Village. Really highly influenced us because we were close to Detroit and they came to Toronto a lot and showed us a lot of love. So JD and the Slum Village movement was something that really influenced our sound as well. So the difference between us and them, it depends. I'd like to think that we felt a little bit freer in Canada to musically express ourselves in different ways, not just so straight line hip hop. So a lot of the artists that blew up in Canada, I'm thinking about, when I say Cardi, I'm talking about Cardinal, let's be clear. When I think about Cardinal Official, or when I think about Chaos or even Socrates, these are artists that really blew up that weren't scared to like sing or do reggae or play the guitar, or even Shad singing and playing the guitar now. So I think there was a little bit of, you know, we don't have to be so kind of straight edge hip hop or purist hip hop. We can kind of express all the different facets of us. I find that Canadian identities are very, if it's like a pie, our identities as people are split into like 100 different little slivers, or 50. It's not like 3. Like, we're not just like, yo, I'm this or I'm that, or, you know, I'm a woman, or I'm this race, or I'm this sexual orientation. Like, we really define ourselves by like 100 different things. And I like that. It's very diverse. And so I think you see that a lot in our music as well. So that's what I would like to say differentiates us. But there is also a lot of mimicry as well. And I don't even want to say mimicry. I grew up on American hip hop. So even if you listen to me, and I spent almost a decade in New York City. So even if you listen to me, you're going to hear that boom bap, underground, indie kind of golden era New York City sound. So it's also just a natural progression of what you're influenced by and what you listen to.
Is that something that when you go back to Canada, is there, there's like hip hop purists, right? Like, I mean, is there, like, when you go back to Canada, is there criticism or conversation and be like, well, no, you sound too much like, you sound like too much like a New Yorker. Is that something that's a conversation between Canadian, I guess, hip hop purists, in terms of how you sound? Like, are they like, well, maybe you should maybe sound more like you're from Toronto versus from, Queens, type stuff?
I don't think it's a huge issue. I know that when I lived in Australia, I lived there for half a year. Not sounding Australian and sounding like you have an American accent when you rap was a huge deal to them. Like, that was like, and there was still people that blew up sounding American and not sounding Aussie. But in Canada, I'm sure it's a conversation. I'm sure people have it, but it's not like one of those big, huge hot topics. I think we've always, I mean, even when you go back to the greats of the 80s in Canada, I think we held our own against American artists and sounded, to maybe somebody who's not from either country, we would sound quite similar. So no, I didn't face that. I think people in hip hop generally look for authenticity, and they'll pull your card quick. At least the era that I came up in, I know it's different now. They'll pull your card quick when it comes to not being authentic. And I think that people, for me, I guess they just found me authentic. I was back and forth to the States. I lived in Connecticut in the 90s. I was with Demigods then, and then was in New York off and on, and then lived there for almost 10 years. So I don't think people found that to be problematic that I'm aware of.
When you got kicked out of the house and you started going on tour, with a bunch of hip hop groups, when was your first trip to the United States? And then when was your first trip to the United States to actually pursue your art?
Well, the first memory I have, I probably went before that, but the first memory I have was before I got kicked out of the house. I was probably like 13. And my aunt lives just outside of New York City in a small town called Nanuet near Spring Valley. I later learned that Pete Rock had family in Spring Valley, and I used to frequent this deli that I ended up working at in Spring Valley. I mean, in Spring Valley. So, anyways, long story short, nobody knows Nanuet, but they do know Spring Valley, New York. And I remember visiting her, and even though we weren't in the city, we were outside of the city, I still felt like this, I guess you could say, hip hop energy. Maybe it was like when I went shopping in the stores and I found like Echo gear for $10, and I was super excited about it. I remember that. I'm like, ooh, this Echo sweater is $10, whatever it was, or the magazines I was copping there, and they had more magazines than we had back home, or the television. Like, all I had to do was turn on and watch cable, and I was just like, ooh, like, this is crazy. I think that was my first memory of really connecting with New York State at that time. And then I started I moved to Connecticut when I was 17. And that was to be a part of the Demigods. And I lived there for a year. And, that really changed my life and the trajectory of my music and my sound significantly. I always say I moved to Connecticut sounding like Salt and Pepper, and I left sounding like a little bit more like Pharoah Monch. Not that anybody sounds like Pharoah Monch, but, my influence and my style. So there was that. And there was definitely trips in between. And after that, I made a lot of connections through Microsoft Internet Relay Chat. We are all internet geeks at this point because it's just what rules our lives. But back in the day, not everyone was on it. This is way before AOL Instant Messenger. Mm-hmm. And made a lot of connections with cats and crews in like Jersey and all over, actually. But I was plugged into and frequenting different hip hop crews in the 90s, way before 2000. And just jumping on stages with them and jumping into cyphers outside of the New Yorican or wetlands, like, late at night, or just jumping on like crew tracks, you know what I'm saying? Like all these crew tracks, like it was just any place I could be where I could spit, I would be. And so I don't remember how often I frequented New York City from 95 to 2000. I just remember that it was frequent enough that I felt like I had family there and I could jump into the hip hop scene at any moment.
In terms of art, what was your with the demigods? What was kind of your biggest uh, kind of like hip hop lesson, I guess you could say, or like what you kind of took away from it that you still kind of use today when you write or when you perform?
Wow. Apathy ate, breathed, shit, slept hip hop. He still does. And when I was there, it was like hip hop boot camp for me. And what I observed him do is he would always spit for anybody at any time at the drop of a dime, even if they didn't ask. So we'd be at the radio show. We used to go up to this radio show at UConn. I forget the name of it. WHUS. I just forget what show it was, but we used to go up there like constantly, just hang it out at the WHUS studios. App used to call people, like he'd meet people and like he'd nurture those connections. He'd constantly call them, like I mean label execs and shit, and like and like big like artists that were much bigger than us at the time, like Supernatural and stuff like that. And I remember he just called them up and bugged them and just like spit for them and be like, yo, listen to this, yo, listen to this. Like, and so that hunger of I will be in your face, I will spit a verse whether you like it or not, and you're gonna like it, and then you're gonna want to nurture a connection with me based on that was something I probably learned from him. And also just lyricism and bars. You know, he's a super lyricist, so I think a lot of my style, especially early on, was influenced by his sound.
So I want to ask you about other artists and friends of yours, you know, that have come through your life and have obviously had impacts on your career and on your personal life. And you know, I just kind of say their name, and you could either tell a story, just kind of words that come to. So the first one would be DJ Eclipse.
Yeah, DJ Eclipse. I think he really became aware of my music when I moved to New York. So after 2005 or around then, 2006, 2007. I don't know when it first came across his desk, but he will tell the story that he didn't know what I looked like. He just knew what I sounded like, and he thought this shit's dope. I'm gonna support it, and he supported it ever since. Ultimately, we ended up kind of, you know, he worked for Fat Beats, he worked for the store, and I think he did stuff for the label as well. And I ended up on Fat Beats 5 years later, and that's a whole funny story because the first time I got shopped to Fat Beats through an A&R that was no longer like, you know, was there but then left, they did not pick me up. I tried to get It's Called Life picked up at Fat Beats, and they were not having it. And then, you know, years later, persistence. But yeah, so Eclipse was somebody who always just was a purist in the sense of if it sounds dope, I'm playing it. I don't care who you are, if you're a popular name or where you're from. And we need more people like that in hip hop that are in positions of power. And so he ran tunes on his show, you know, like crazy. I think Foul Child in 2007 was the first time that, not 2007, sorry, but Foul Child was 2009, was the first time that like I really got rinsed on like a lot of hip hop shows across the country and indie rap radio especially. But he was probably playing stuff before that. And then, of course, he helps curate Rocksteady, the stage, and he was giving me spots on that as well. And just anytime there was an opening and a mic and he could provide that platform, he did. And he still does to this day. So big props to DJ Eclipse, who we did a retrospect mixtape leading up to this album. And he killed it. Like I told him this, I was like, yo, if I was dead, and this is what somebody made for me to memorialize me after I died musically, this is what I imagine it would sound like. Like I feel like I've heard it while still being alive. He did such a beautiful job.
Next artist would be Murs.
Yeah, Murs. I always laugh because like the first time I met Murs, we were, I guess, all young. So 1997, Rocksteady. I was living in Connecticut at the time, and I'm sure we met, like we went all 3 days. So one of the days was Gaelic Park in the Bronx, and I remember we all ciphered on the subway after we left, and it was like this whole train car just full of like these young hip hop heads from around the world, like global heads. And I remember ciphering with like App, and I think this cat called Voodoo Ray, and I think Murs was there, and then okay, so 2 days later, I think, or one day later, it's Manhattan Center, right? The big concert at Manhattan Center. Big Pun rocked that day, and I think Pharaoh, a bunch of people rocked that day. And Murs just looked at me and was like, yo, give me your lanyard. I want your lanyard. And I was just like, a Rocksteady lanyard? I just looked at him. I was like, who are you? No, I'm not giving you my lanyard. I always tell that story because that's my first memory of Murs. But Murs was an independent rapper, is an independent rapper, just like us, who killed the game, was so on top of his business and so on top of just creating a lane for himself that we can all look up to and admire and respect. The fact that he still remembers me and basically highlights me when he has the opportunity to is something that he doesn't have to do. Once again, somebody in a position of power that does not have to like pull up someone who's down below. And he does time and time again, from inviting us onto Paid Dues stage in 2011, I want to say. I think it was 2010 or 2011. That was a big look on the big stage. To just mentioning me in interviews or like reposting stuff on his Instagram. And more things there was one time he hit me up and was like, yo, I got this track with Ski Beats. I want you on it. I didn't see the message until 2 days later, and he was like, too late. 2 days later.
2 days.
But he's always looking out. You know what I'm saying? He's always looking out, and he doesn't have to. And that's something that I hope I pay forward to people that perhaps are coming up and just at a different stage than I am. I try to open my stages to them as well.
DJ Premier.
Yeah, DJ Premier is kind of a mind-blowing thing that I just can't even take credit for or understand how that happens. The first time he really started being aware of my music was probably when I started working with Moss, because Moss was his production partner for a while with Works of Mart. But he's not going to play something because somebody knows somebody. Primo is just like Eclipse. If it's dope, it's dope. If it's not, it's not. And he will tell you exactly what it is. And he really, really was like supportive. I remember going up there for like 2 hours maybe on his show at Sirius headquarters in 2010 when we dropped the album. He cut up like half the record and played like almost the entire album on air. And we were sitting there for 2 hours just shooting the shit, really. That was kind of surreal. It's almost like you can't really wrap your head around what that means. And subsequently, he still plays tracks of ours as recently as the most recent single, Most People, he played on his show a couple weeks ago. But once again, it's just like you don't have to do that. Like, you're in a position of power and comfort, and you don't have to look out for people, especially people like myself that are, you know, kind of the underdog, really. And he did, and he still does. And I think I just want to mention loyalty, because it's not just about, yo, this person's popping right now, so I'm gonna play them. It's, yo, I'm a fan, and no matter what year or stage or phase, if the music sounds good, I'm playing it. And I find that these people that we're mentioning now, there's like a longevity of loyalty. There's like decades of loyalty, you know, or at least a decade.
Of course, someone who's very special to you, Mr. Lift.
Yeah, I mean, for those that don't know, I am married to Mr. Lif. And way before we were friends for 17 years before our first kiss. So a beautiful platonic friendship for 17 years. And back then, he would open up his stages to me. And I remember I'd moved to Australia and temporarily, and my whole thing was like, yo, I want to take over the hip hop scene here. I just got there. It's 2003. And I saw that he was going to be coming through to do a headlining show there at a larger venue. And I probably pulled one of the only favors I've ever pulled in my life, because I don't really do that. I don't feel comfortable doing that. Maybe it's just my ego. I don't really call on people for stuff. But I called him up and I was just like, yo, can I open for you when you get here? He was just like, absolutely. Like, it was just not even a conversation point. And then, of course, what you have to do as a headliner is basically tell the promoter, this person's going on right before me. Like, not 10 acts before me, not when you open the doors and ain't nobody here. This person's going on right before me. So there's a lot of advocacy that happens like that, you know? He did that. And then subsequently, like, the entire world of Australian hip hop just opened up to me because they were all there that day. And everything happened really fast after that in terms of opportunities. So once again, just one look. And he's done other things too, obviously. I mean, he's been the greatest, for lack of a better word, he's been the greatest cheerleader and supporter of this record that's coming out when it got hard, which was often. He's just been the one that talked sense to me or gave me wisdom or helped me redirect. But that first initial thing that I always remember is him allowing me to open for him in Australia at a pretty large show, and it changing the trajectory of my career, really.
Rah Digga.
Yeah, Rah Digga is, anybody that's met Rah Digga knows she's hilarious. She is humble. She is real. And once again, real in the sense of if you're real, she just rocks with you, you know? And Moss came up with the idea to have like a female version, I guess you could say, of the barbecue, live at the barbecue on the record, which was a brilliant idea. And I don't know whose idea it was to get Rah. I'm a huge fan of Rah Digga, so it was probably both of ours. And we didn't know how easy or hard it would be. I don't remember how we connected with her. I don't think I had a connection to her before that I recall. But we did. She was super humble. She came through the studio that we booked in on Canal Street in New York City. Yeah, and she was hilarious. She walked in and she literally was like, yo, so I got these beats from Pete Rock. She had her laptop with her. She opened up her laptop. She's like, I got these beats from Pete Rock. Maybe we can rock on one of these. Like, she was offering them to us for this session. And I just remember having to explain. I was like, but this album's with Moss, like the entire album. Like, we can't use a Pete Rock beat. But thank you. Like, you know what I mean? The way she writes is so unorthodox. She like kind of does like two bars at a time, and then figures out where to fit them in like puzzle pieces later, you know.
Oh wow.
So it's like
Yeah.
she writes punchlines and then slides them into different places as she goes. So that exact same verse she spit on the barbecue could have came out in a different order, you know, on a different take. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So that was really cool. I learned a lot from just watching her process. She came in the studio like just mad, like she was just fun and hilarious and just ready to go. And I found out later, maybe it was a year later, I don't know how long later, that she pulled me aside and was like, yo, you basically like, I don't know if she said you saved my life or you saved my career, but she was like, the day that I came to the studio that day to record that verse with you, my house burned down and everything in it. But because I was recording the verse with you, my music was with me. I guess it was all on her laptop and maybe her hard drive. She's like, my music was with me. So the only thing I had after I lost basically everything was my music. And then I went back to the same room, her mother's house, the same room that I wrote Dirty Harriet in the 90s. And that's where I was. And that's how that record with Knots came through. And she actually dropped it, I think the same month that we dropped that last. So it's funny because she could view it as the opposite. She could be like, yo, I'm angry with you. If I was home, that wouldn't have happened. And the fire happened and I wasn't there. But instead she viewed it as this like omen to like just get back to basics and start writing again and drop an album. And she often references that. And so it's interesting because like, yeah. And we've rocked so many stages together since our song, not just on my set, but even on her set, we've rocked our song more than once. So that's humility, like to be like this is a collab track that you did for me, and you're like, yo, let's do it on my set. But yeah, I could say so much about these people. It's just kind of one of those things that I can't fully wrap my head around, and I just soak it up and just kind of thank God when stuff like that happens. It's never an expectation, you know what I'm saying? Never. And she's so real. And to this day, we had a last listening session in 10 years. We had like a 10-year anniversary party on Instagram. Oh, nice. She showed up, you know what I'm saying? Blessed us with a couple of words. Like, she's just always there when I call on her. And that's huge. She's a huge artist.
I want to turn in, Eternia, I want to ask you about it's kind of two questions. The state of the female MC and the relationship with not the media, but also with the technical part, like engineers or, you know, when, and I want to ask you because years ago I interviewed Rah Digga for the podcast, and we talked about how she's been in interview sessions or radio spots where she's been on hold for like, you know, 20 minutes, and then she gets on, and the only thing the host wants to ask her about is like, tell me, you know, like whoever's the popular female MC at the time, what do you think about her? And then that's the question. And then, all right, bye, see you later, you know, type stuff. So trying to pin female MCs against each other.
Yeah.
Has that experience ever happened to you? And then what is kind of I guess that was years ago, but what's the state of the female MC when she gets on a media platform? And, you know, is it the conversation like, tell me about you know, what do you think about this female MC that's popular now? And then let me get a soundbite from you. Or has it changed at all?
I think in general, a lot of women in music and women in hip hop, when they get interviewed, get asked a lot of the same questions. And it provides a narrative that is very narrow in scope and kind of flat and superficial. Oftentimes it's because, and Tim, you do a great interview, so this isn't talking about you personally, but oftentimes it's because it's the male voice or the male narrator that's kind of directing the narrative. And so, you know, it'll be the same. Some of the questions aren't bad questions. It's just they're always the same questions, which means you only learn so much about this person. It's kind of like boring. You know what I'm saying? Right. And then, yes, being asked constantly about what you think about other female MCs, when, to be frank, and I try to keep it real when people ask me that, and I went to school for journalism, so I totally respect the journalists and understand that they're doing their job. But, you know, my answer is typically I don't think about them. Like, right. Unless it's somebody I actually listen to and I'm a fan of, I don't. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't have a negative thought about them. I don't have a positive thought about them. I don't think about them. You know, I'm like a horse with the blinders on. Unless it's somebody that I've rocked with and can speak to as a character, as a person, I don't feel comfortable doing that. And also, like, gossip in general is just, I understand that it sells, But it's just not a part of what I want to be a part of my character and my legacy. So thankfully, I think for the most part, I've been able to stay out of that.
Right. In 2010, you were interviewed, and during the interview, you said, and I'll quote it: "There's something about sexism specifically that doesn't seem to get people up in arms or offend most people, especially in
Yeah.
hip hop. So it's like the little things that happen all the time, little statements, like little experiences. I find that
Yeah.
oftentimes when it comes to technical stuff like mixing and mastering a record, my opinion is not really taken seriously. But if I get my male manager, my male business partner, my male representative to be my
Or
mouthpiece,
even
so business
intern.
or intern. So is that you fast forward to today? Is that still? Do you find that still being the case with the dynamic, I guess, in a female in studio talking to an engineer to master a male engineer to master their album?
It definitely has not changed that much. I'm sure as I progress as an artist and become more confident, I'm able to pick people that I consider, inner circle, and therefore there's a little bit more respect than there might have been 10 years ago with someone that, I'm basically a little bit more. I curate the people around me in a sense to make sure that there is respect there, and if there's no respect there, then we're not really working together. So in that sense, I have experienced a shift, thankfully. But no, I think at large, the type of misogyny or just it's almost like weird to use large words like misogyny or sexism, but that's what it is. It's like almost like a dismissiveness or like a pat in the head, a little bit
Mhm.
patronizing, a little bit like condescending, a little bit, yeah, like that's cool, that's what you want, but this is what we're doing, or this is what makes sense, like in terms of maybe engineering language or whatever. My sister just finished recording an album and she experienced a lot of that in terms of her saying, this is what I need musically in my mix or in my master. And people are very nice and very kind, but they're still very dismissive. And it is very different when someone else communicates it. And I still experience that to this day. Um, Not only how you communicate is everything, but who is doing the communicating is everything. And so, yeah, I would say it's still definitely prevalent, sorry, and just very insidious because it's so subtle. And unless you're a woman, it's like, actually, I don't think most dudes know they're doing it. And a lot of these
Right.
dudes think they really respect women and are very egalitarian and forward thinking. And it's almost like so second nature, you don't know. When Lif and I listen to certain hip hop radio shows, which I will not mention because I do respect them, it's so funny. It's like this dichotomy of like, hip hop has always treated women as second class citizens and poorly. And in fact, that's what's celebrated. There's radio shows that Lif and I listen to that like almost every track on the radio show is in some way dehumanizing women. And that's kind of like the rap that people want to hear. Even on the independent scene, I'm not even talking major. And I don't think Lif ever, I'm not saying he never took it in before, but I think he takes it in a lot more now because he's sitting there with me listening to it. So that's like a really good point to make. It's just like, I don't think for the average male in hip hop, it's even a blip on the radar. It's just like, yeah, well, this is what we rap about. We might rap about some guns, we might rap about some drugs, but if we don't do that, we're definitely rapping about some women in a way that is, commodifying or degrading. It's just like, this is like disc culture. It's a part of hip hop. It's like embedded in the fabric. Pharaoh Monch, like I was listening to him on this crew track, and I can't tell you which track it was, but on this radio show, and I really respect Pharaoh. I love Pharaoh. Like Pharaoh's like I don't want to say a god to me, but he's like one of my favorite MCs. And and we know each other. And he said this line, like it was about like it was just a diss to female MCs, like all female MCs about like all they're good for and like something about his balls or his nuts or whatever.
Yeah.
And I was just like, yo, for someone in 2021 to even think that that's like an okay line to say because it's hip hop. Like I'm sure
Right.
he thinks that he respects women, but because it's hip hop, it's okay to say. It's like dudes that don't really own guns that talk about guns on tracks because it's hip hop or whatever. Like it's like, no, actually, like you're actually raising up a whole bunch of people to think like you, which is disrespectful to an entire gender of humans that have the power of life that gave birth to you. Like there's a reason why systemically, I'm sorry I'm going off, but there's a reason why systemically women have been degraded since the beginning of time. It's because there is a fear of the power that women hold. Like technically, let's talk about it. Pussies are way stronger than balls. You kick a dude in the balls, he is going down. Pussies give life. We actually give birth to like 9, 10 pound babies. We stretch, we contract, we come back again and we do it all. Like people should literally be like, yo, like you're a nutsack when they're talking about somebody being weak. Because like a nutsack is weak. pussy is the opposite of weak in every way. So it's just, if we think about how we've constructed this narrative for like centuries, really, there's a reason for that. It's not coincidental. It's because there is a fear of the power that women can hold if they are in any way empowered or given any kind of platform to do so. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I mean, Eternia, I want to talk about your music, but I have one more question on this.
I did not expect to go there. I just had to go there.
No, that was great. You tell people, or you say hey to people, not saying you or me, me saying hey, I'm interviewing, or I'm going, I'm listening to Eternia's music or interviewing Eternia, and then people go, oh yeah, she's the white female MC, right? And then you say, but the truth is, right, is that you're not fully white. You're half white, you're half Middle Eastern. So what is it like when someone sees you and thinks you're just a white female MC in hip hop? And what is it like when you're coming up in the 90s? But then the next question is, what are new obstacles, if there are any, when someone finds out that you're actually half Middle Eastern?
I almost feel like I'm like, that hasn't been on anyone else's radar except for my own, really.
Okay.
There was meaning the reality of the fact that I'm mixed. I think that there was this time when I first dropped in Turkey, somebody wrote in a main paper in Turkey, they wrote a write-up about me, and I was having all these people from Turkey writing me in Turkish, which I don't speak, sadly. And so I was like, oh, people out there know about me and they love me, support me. It was like an insane amount of emails. But ultimately, I almost feel like it's not really a blip on anyone else's radar, and that's okay. Like, I'm actually cool with that. I understand that I don't walk around saying I'm not white. I understand that my lived experience is that of a white woman, and that's how I've been treated my whole life. So I don't actually try to like fight that or say, no, that's not true. I actually don't call myself a person of color at all. I have other family members who look exactly like me that do perceive themselves as people of color, but not myself. So just because I think I'm just pragmatic, and I'm like, yo, this is how the world works, and this is how I've been afforded opportunities based on the fact, probably without me knowing, based on my skin color. Um, and so no, I'm not trying to perpetrate in any way. But I think when people ask me about my heritage and my culture and my background, it's very important for me to say, well, actually, I'm mixed, and my father's side of the family is olive skinned, and they come from the desert, and they didn't speak English when they came to Canada. He was an immigrant. He was 15 and couldn't speak a word of English and was treated like shit. And so there's that story as well. It's not my story, it's my father's story, but it's a part of our story, So to answer your question, I haven't been treated worse when people find out. I haven't been treated better or differently, and most of the time it's almost like people find out and then they just kind of forget. That's the experience that I've had, and maybe it's because I don't speak the language. I was raised by my mother, who's the white side of the white bread side of the family, so it could be because I don't speak the language. But yeah.
You talk about your music. You debuted in 2005 with It's Called Life, and then.
But thank you for asking me, by the way.
Of course, of course,
Because it
yeah.
doesn't
No,
usually come up. See, that's a good point. It doesn't usually come up. Continue.
and then at last in 2010, with Moss was kind of your last album prior to the one you're about to drop, Free. And you talk about the cosigns you've had with Eclipse, Premier, and Murs, Lif, Digga.
And I don't as cosigns. It's so funny when you say that. I know it's true, but for me, it's just like these relationships where people are sincere. But yes, continue.
Right. Yes, but you have people that are,
They are.
and to your point, you have Premier, or still playing most people an album, 11 years later. So
Yeah.
he's still,
Yeah.
but then you think, and so you think, okay, you're really good at what you do. There's a lot of people that obviously think and believe you're really good at what you do, but then after 2010, you walked away, which had to be, I imagine, a hard thing to do at the time. Can you talk about your decision to walk away? Why'd you do it? And then kind of when did you realize you wanted to come back?
Yeah, I have to quote this line from most people because I feel like I've never really summarized it in a better way. And I was trying to grapple with what happened then, because in hindsight, everything's 2020. But at the time, I don't even know if I intentionally made the decision intentionally, but it happened. And so the line is, I don't know if it was God or my sin, self-sabotage, or wisdom of the ages kicking in. All I know is I left. And now when I look back, I often wonder if I missed or blew my one shot for impact. And so it's almost like, was it God leading me to go somewhere else? I am a person of faith. I was seeking God at the time. Or was it just me being scared of success. Like, I don't know, and I never will know. And on certain days, I am regretful. And on other days, I'm like, yo, it's the best thing I ever did. So I still feel conflicted about it. But basically, my relationship with hip hop at the time had become a little bit warped. I think good things can become ultimate things. And when good things become ultimate things, it's almost like they control you as opposed to you controlling it. And hip hop, my career specifically, and not just hip hop, but the whole self promotion thing, like the thing of like, it's all about me and that's my job, was becoming warped and twisted. And so I think a recalibration was necessary. And so whether intentionally or not, me moving home, I actually moved home 2013 from New York City and really did like a 180. Like, I mean, I worked at a long-term care home with 90-year-olds. I was like just hanging out with my family. I was going to church constantly and not really doing much in hip hop except for when somebody asked me to. I think that was perhaps like the pendulum shift, the extreme pendulum shift that needed to happen from what I would describe as just being like hyper obsessed with my career to the point of like everything else suffered. And so for a long time, like probably since 1995, nothing else mattered except for pursuing my career in hip hop. So I think that pendulum shift probably had to happen, but it wasn't really about hip hop being the problem. Anything can become the problem when you make it your ultimate thing, and when it becomes something that is a slave driver of you. Right. At the record state, it could be your job on Wall Street, it could be your family, even like when you put them to God status. It doesn't matter what it is. So I think that I needed to recalibrate that, and hopefully it has been recalibrated, and there's like a healthy balance now between loving other people, serving other people, prioritizing people over things, and not prioritizing fame or fortune. I never really prioritized fortune, but not prioritizing that, and still knowing that you are a creative and you need to create in order to be okay mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And I had a really bad burnout in my mid 30s based on the fact that I think I wasn't being creative at all, and I think that was a large part of it.
You think about music, and to me, right, it's like not an artist at all, but music is our escape from our 9 to 5 job, our family, or whatever. And then you see you, and you had to escape from the things that we escaped from,
the unhealthy relationship that I had probably developed with it, mostly inside
right.
my heart.
So what was your dynamic with at this time? Some people, when they need to take a break from their job, they're completely advised to not even talk about the industry that they're in. What was your, I guess, your relationship there with listening to music on the radio, or even like, I mean, even you're married to Mr. Lif, who's another artist, right? So like him maybe bouncing music ideas off of you and whatnot. I mean, what was that relationship with you and music?
That's a good question. I think once I started dating Lif, I had actually reached a place of like coming around to hopefully healing. So it was a little bit of a better place. But both of us were in a similar place in terms of it could be a sore spot for us, talking about hip hop, listening to hip hop. It could be a source of joy, but you just never knew. It's like if we go to this concert, or if we turn on this radio show, or if we listen to this whatever, or click on this link, is it going to bring us, like, is it going to get us hype and make us like miss hip hop, or is it going to like get us down to a place where like we're kind of I don't know, criticizing or being critical or being down on ourselves in our own careers or comparing, and you just kind of never know which way it goes. So I think both of us were in a similar place that way. I think he was also feeling like, what is his place in hip hop? Does he even have a place? Does it matter anymore? We both struggle with feeling like, at our stage of making music as artists, since we've been doing it since the 90s, like, does anyone even want to hear us? I'm being real with you. Does anybody even want to? Is it relevant? Are we even good anymore, or do we just sound like these old data rappers that need to stop rapping? Like, I shouldn't say that, but it's the truth. This is the insecurities that we deal with on a regular basis. And so with him, it wasn't, I'm sure if I was dating someone like 10 years younger who was like just coming up, it would have been different. But no, we were very much in the same boat. And yes, for a long time, my relationship with hip hop was kind of like, I could take it in small doses, but I just needed long breaks from it, and I couldn't be immersed, But we're coming out of that, and I think both Lif and I are at a place of like really missing it and craving it and needing to be around it more now.
You turn to the new album with Rel McCoy, and you think of the title "Free," and it just from that answer, you think free, and you're like, all right, you're at a much better place than you were. I mean, you're
Hopefully,
free's
that's the
been
thing.
so much. Can you break down this title for us and what kind of the significance of it for you and Rel
I
McCoy?
guess when I named it free, it was kind of like the way I wanted it to feel and the way I wanted it to be in the creation process, and also while listening to it, just everything about it. I just wanted the whole experience to feel free, and I wanted to feel free, and it was more of a desire of my heart than something that I necessarily always achieved, although there were times where we achieved that. Another thing we did to try and achieve that is we intentionally only worked with people that we considered friends or family. So everybody on the album is someone that I can like break bread with and call a brother or a sister, and I respect them as human beings, not just as people who are dope that are names that people want to see. Which in the past I had done stuff like that. I had people on my records that I didn't know personally that I wouldn't really call a friend and that didn't really represent what I believed in. So it was really nice to this time around make sure that everyone was people's. But yeah, free, I think ultimately ended up meaning to us this search for this freedom, freedom of mind and freedom of spirit, the kind of freedom I always say, like Nelson Mandela had in a jail cell. Like, it does not matter. Your circumstances is not what makes you free or fulfilled. It's this state of being. And to me, ultimately, emotional, physical, mental, but spiritual underneath all of those different, layers. And we're seeking that on the record, and I don't know if we find it. I think if people listen to the album, I don't know if they're going to get like the secret to freedom, but I think it's the seeking freedom. And what does that mean? And exploring all the different facets of what drags you down and perhaps holds you back from freedom, and a lot of that being in our own minds and hearts as well. And then don't get it twisted. Like, I was listening to the record yesterday. I actually listened to the test presses, which was super exciting.
I saw that, yeah.
Man, it was great. But I was listening to the record, and like, if you didn't know, like, if I didn't tell you, this is like the underlying theme, it's not obvious. I think the songs are very practical daily life type stuff, but the underlying theme, I think, that I was trying to figure out for myself was that.
I like in most people, and it's it's a simple line, but it also says a lot about kind of the how you've been kind of battle tested throughout your career, whether in ciphers, whether clubs or whatnot. And and most people look at me like, who let her in this spot? And, JS1 has a story about being a Southpaw club, and you got on stage, and he just decided to test you, and he kept on changing up the beat and whatnot. And then he said you killed it. And then I think you guys did a few collaborations afterwards. How do you, what prior to all that, what has been in your life, or even just like through your teachings and learning, that has you overcome these burdens, or not burdens, but these kind of getting battle tested, and not I guess not folding?
That's funny. It's like asking me that. It's almost like, when a character trait is so innate to you, it's like you don't think about it, and then
Right.
somebody, you're like, oh, I didn't even know that was a thing. I think part of it's genetic. My father is very, both my mother and my father were kind of rebels in their own way, and kind of like don't listen to what everyone else says, and kind of does their own thing in different ways. And my father was very like, is very kind of arrogant and cocky and kind of like, I know everything. My mother, not at all, but both of them have a sense of like independence and leadership, and kind of like, I'm just going to do my own thing. Like, it doesn't matter what the world's doing. So there's that. And that was just something that I saw my whole life growing up innately, and absorbed it. And then I think, well, I always say I'm a Taurus, right? Like, I'm not huge in astrology at all, but we're bulls. Like, you tell us not to walk off the cliff, I'm going to be like, oh, word, watch me walk off this cliff and I'm going to grow wings. Like, I almost want people to not believe in me and doubt me, because that's fuel for me. And that's just my personality type. And it's been subdued over the years, but it's still me. It's like, yeah, you telling me this can't happen? That's exactly why it's going to happen, because you're telling me it's not going to happen, And so that really fueled me for a great portion of my career. That was probably one of my only main motivating things, was just, everybody says I can't do this, so watch me, so yeah, I'd say personality and upbringing, and then just having a thick skin. You need to be a woman in hip hop. To be in hip hop, period, you need to have a thick skin. To be in the music industry, period. But in addition to that, to be a woman in hip hop, if you don't have a thick skin, you're not getting far at all. And so I often mention this. Like, I learned early on in the game, probably around 2000 or maybe early 2000s, I learned, just don't scroll down. Like, when you see posts and you're you know, thankfully someone's shining a light on you, just don't look at the comments. Like, just don't scroll down. Funny enough, over the years, those comments have all become supportive and nice. But in general, way back when, it was just the worst insults known to man. Like, bulletin boards when they were huge and popping. Like, somebody would be like, yo, this chick's dope. You need to check her out, and drop a link. And then the comments, wow, like the worst despicable forms of humanity. But you just learn, like, don't scroll down. And so to me, I always say, like a horse with blinders on. Like, I was just like, I think I had enough people that I respected and admired that told me I was dope and to keep going. Maestro being one of those people, but there were so many along the way that I was just like, I don't care what you think about me rapping. People that I respect and admire that have come before me are encouraging me and telling me that I'm dope, and I believe it. And it's just one of those things where it's true. It's corny. It's so corny to say, but when you truly believe in yourself and you're doing what you're called to do, that shit is just like water off a duck's back. So for the most part, I'm not saying there's not times where I wasn't upset, but for the most part, it's just like a blip on the radar. I don't remember JS doing that. Case in point. Like, I'm sure he did. I was just up there having fun rapping. Like, I didn't even notice. And I think my manager noticed, you know, we were talking about this earlier. I think Sav was looking at JS like, what are you trying to do? But I was just like, change the tempo if you want. Cut the beat out if you want. You know, do a bad juggle. And like I'll just jump right back on. I have rapped where I fall on my ass off a high stage and I don't even miss a line. Like, I still have the mic in my hand and I'm still spitting the same verse and I just keep going. Like, it's like, you know, there's something that happens. It's like the superhero thing when you get on stage.
So, you know, this is your first album in 11 years, free with Rel McCoy. Obviously, a lot has changed for you. You have a family. Your writing process has changed and everything. When you sat down to write this album, what did you quickly learn about yourself in terms of the album creation process or even the writing process that, you know, so maybe like a habit that you used to do that you might have changed or you didn't want to get in part of or whatnot?
I think there were habits that I wanted to do that I could no longer do because my life forced me to adapt to creating a record in a very different way than I'm used to. So I'm accustomed to being like hyper focused, and that's pretty much all I do for, you know, however long until the record's done. And this time around, it felt like interestingly enough, it felt like a very disjointed creation process over a period of years where I was just like, it felt very disjointed and it was very frustrating for me simply because I just wasn't at the level of productivity that I'm accustomed to. Rel was always there and waiting for me, but my life was so busy and crazy. We moved 5 times during the course of the record being made. You know, I got pregnant after we started, like the inception of the record had happened. I got pregnant. I had a baby, got married. You know, there was like health complications as well that are still ongoing. And I just couldn't wrap my head around, and I'm sure post PPD, you know, was there as well. So I think for the longest time this record felt so excruciating because I couldn't create it the way I'm so used to writing and recording an album, which is kind of like the mad scientist just focused in the studio with the person. And then COVID, let's not forget COVID happened in the middle of our creating this process, creating the album too. So, and I hate doing things virtually. I'm all about the vibes in the studio. So yeah, it was interesting that at the end, when the entire project came together sonically and thematically, it was, I think, quite consistent. And that was a miracle in and of itself because the way it was created, I mean, we're talking different locations, different mics, different engineers, different studios. Like, it was everything. And yet it sounds so sonically cohesive. And big shouts to DJ Merciless who mastered it and made it sound so sonically cohesive. But there was no rhyme or reason to how this record got done. It's a miracle it got done, basically.
This is my last question for you, Eternia. You got to listen to the album yesterday, right? The test prep, and if you I just want you to think of a lyric that you might have written, or even a track from this album that says to you like, "Oh shit, this album's great," or "This is some of my best work yet."
It's funny. I always think about other people's lyrics, not my own, like features on the record. Like, I always hear Wordsworth's verse in my head, or Lif's, or Shad's, or so I don't know if I've ever actually thought about that, what you just said. But I do know that on the last track, Rel's favorite track, which is called Let No Dream Fall, I kind of outline my own. I start by being a little bit bragging, but then I dive into like insecurity, and I'm like, really, like, what am I doing? I'm here, I'm rapping, but does anyone care? And I can't give you a direct line because I'd kind of have to start it from the very top of the verse and go through the whole thing. That's the way I am.
Okay.
It's like a Rolodex. If I pull my first line, I can pull the verse, but I can't just pull a line. But I will say that "Let No Dream Fall" is a verse that really speaks to the tension and the struggle and the dichotomy of making music because you've always made music, yet not knowing if it's just going to be like a drop in a bucket or if there's a little bit of both strength in that verse and also weakness. And so I think it's fitting. It's at the end of the record. It was either going to be the intro track or the end, and it's at the end. So I would say after you've listened to everything else, "Let No Dream Fall" is a little bit of my, just my heart when it comes to doing music again.
So the new album is free with Rel McCoy. Eternia, thank you so much for being on
Thank you so much.
allcloud.com. Presents live with Tim Einenkel. Thank you again. Thanks.
All right, peace.
Peace.